officers kicked out
wait.
a tailgate, then went to another one. But let's get back to the point.
So
Let me
kicking
get back to the point. No.
Kicking a
Let's get
tailgate
back to the
11
point.
days prior is justification to kill somebody?
Okay, there's an ongoing investigation. The point is,
but there isn't, because DHS
if law enforcement would have done its job by arresting him and enforcing the law, he wouldn't have been at the second protest where he was trying
to
get in the middle of a federal investigation, which is a bad idea.
That single exchange changes the entire tone of the interview. What began as a debate about protest tactics instantly turns into a confrontation over life, death, and legal responsibility. One side frames the issue as accountability for prior actions. The other frames it as proportionality and due process. From this moment forward, the conversation is no longer about dancing or student walkouts. It becomes a test of consistency and whether each argument can withstand scrutiny when pushed to its logical conclusion.
But joining me now is Brian Tyler Cohen, progressive YouTuber. Brian, great to see you again. Thanks for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Do you think that the dancing is really a productive way to get reforms of ICE that the left is calling for?
I think everybody should speak out in the way that they can be most effective. And so if dancers want to dance, then good on them. If there are students who want to walk out, good on them. If there are legislators who want to actually do something, good on them. We can all do our part. And I don't think that we should be, saving smoke for people who are trying to, offer up what little they can to draw attention to this, when there are other people who are just basically apologizing for ICE's overreach.
I mean, I do agree. I mean, I'm glad that they're not screaming and interrupting federal investigations
or shooting people in the face, for example.
Or operations where ICE agents are trying to go in and remove pedophiles and rapists and murderers from communities, blowing whistles in their ears. I agree. I'm glad that dancing is a better form of peaceful protest. But last week, we saw an unprovoked attack on a mother in an unpeaceful protest, leaving her covered in bruises. She was outside of a school and attacked by kids who were not in school. Why is the left radicalizing these students to not only leave school, where the country has a 54% rate of not being able to read, in order to go out and then attack people who are just asking them to calm down?
Notice the framing. One side emphasizes expression and civic participation. The other immediately shifts to public safety and educational decline. The debate is already expanding beyond the original question.
Yeah, I mean, look, I agree that literacy scores in this country are pretty dismal. And in fact, the lowest literacy scores in this country are in red states run by Republican governors and Republican legislatures. So I definitely think that's a big problem to consider. I mean, if you look at places like Oklahoma, for example, if you look at places like Arkansas, I mean, these are, Mississippi, Louisiana, these have the lowest test scores in the country. But that, I'm assuming that's not what you want to speak about.
I'd be happy to talk about Mississippi. It's actually much better than the majority of the blue states in this country in terms of education. It's actually a great story about education, but that's not about ICE, which is what we're talking about now.
Yeah, that's fine. I don't think you really want to have an argument about the test scores in red states versus blue states. But
I'd be happy to have you back to have that conversation. But I don't think kids should be leaving school to go and protest ICE when they can't read, write, or do arithmetic.
Look, I think that we have a very important First Amendment right in this country, and if kids want to use what platform they have to step out of school to protest the overreach of a tyrannical government and a lawless rogue agency, then I support their ability to do that. Again, look, you're going to find individuals who are going to be violent, and you're never going to see me defend anybody who brings violence into the situation. So I'm not going to defend that. And certainly, there are people everywhere who are going to resort to violence, and I think you and I can both agree that that's not acceptable.
I would agree.
Regardless of.
Here, the clash becomes ideological. Academic performance versus constitutional protest. Stability versus resistance. Both claim principle but prioritize different risks.
Regardless of where it happens. Yeah. But if, in terms of kids walking out of school, I'm completely, look, I think civics in this country is obviously very important. And if kids are going to be paying attention to politics, paying attention to what's happening in their country, I think that more power to them if they can walk out. I think if athletes at the Olympics have something to say and use that platform, more power to them. The more people that can speak up. I mean, I am not of this mind that had, gained a lot of traction in Republican circles where athletes are just supposed to shut up and dribble. We have a long, proud history in this country of people like athletes, for example, standing up at the Olympics going back decades and decades and decades.
Yeah, well, it's good that they live in a country where they have those
platform,
rights. That is true. It's good they live in a country where they have those rights.
And I think one of the most important rights is not to succumb to a tyrannical government. And in fact, that's something that you've been saying for years and years and years. I'm looking at a tweet from 2013. Anybody who believes the United States can never be a tyrannical state has their heads in the sand. So that issue used to be important to you, and yet now you have a rogue agency killing people with impunity. We're not going to see any justice for Renee Good. We gotta
take a second and take a step back. Okay.
This is the turning point. A past statement is introduced. The discussion shifts from policy disagreement to alleged inconsistency.
First of all, Renee Good arguably tried to run over an ICE officer with her car. So you say that you're not for violence. There's lots of video showing that
we
almost ran him over.
We know what it looks like when somebody turns the steering wheel to the right.
In terms of the issue of tyranny, you brought this up last time you were on the show, so I'm happy to bring it up again.
What about Alex Preddy?
Well, there's Alex Preddy was at a protest 2 weeks prior, ICE, and got violent with the officers, kicked out a tailgate, then went to another one. But let's get back to the point.
So
Let me get back to the point. No.
Kicking a tailgate 11 days prior is justification to kill somebody?
Okay, there's an ongoing investigation. The point is,
if
law enforcement would have done its job by arresting him and enforcing the law, he wouldn't have been at the second protest where he was trying to get in the middle of a federal investigation, which is a bad idea.
And he was approached by ICE.
Not to mention that officials, including the lieutenant governor in Minnesota, were telling people to go out and put their bodies on the line to commit felonies by getting in the middle of federal investigations, which is a terrible idea.
By ICE agents. We all saw the video of Alex Preddy
being approached by ICE agents. We also saw the video of him weeks prior agitating and getting violent with ICE agents, which you just said that you're against violence.
Kicking somebody's car is not justification to be
murdered.
Getting
involved in the middle of a federal investigation is a felony, okay?
Do you think kicking someone's car is adequate justification?
Democrats telling children to leave school when they cannot read or do math, which is going to be detrimental for their future, telling them to leave school to go protest ICE with no end in sight, and telling people to put their bodies on the line, as they did with Renee Good and Alex Preddy, is not a good way to change things in Washington. The way you do that is by coming to D.C. and talking about the differences and what they want to change. I would have loved to talk to you about that tonight, but you wouldn't let me get to the point. So, Tyler Cohen, it's great to have you. Thank you for coming on the show. Next time, hopefully, we can have a cordial back and forth instead of talking over each other. Thank you very much.
What we just watched is not simply a heated exchange. It is a layered conflict about authority, protest, and proportional response. First, there is the question of protest tactics. Is expressive activism, even disruptive activism, a legitimate extension of the First Amendment? Or does encouraging walkouts and confrontation create instability that outweighs symbolic value? Both sides present a principle. One prioritizes civic engagement as a safeguard against government overreach. The other prioritizes order, institutional trust, and procedural reform. Second, there is the issue of proportionality. When prior misconduct is introduced, does it explain subsequent enforcement actions or risk being perceived as retroactive justification? The tension in the justification exchange reveals a deeper philosophical divide. Is law enforcement primarily reactive to immediate threats or cumulative patterns of behavior? Third, there is the matter of consistency. The introduction of a past tweet reframes the debate as one about ideological alignment. If someone warns about tyranny in one context, should that standard apply universally regardless of who holds power? That question remains unanswered, but it shifts the burden of explanation. Finally, observe the ending. The host frames the exchange as a breakdown in civility. The guest suggests he was not allowed to complete his points. This closing dynamic is common in high-conflict interviews. Both sides appeal to fairness as the segment ends. No resolution is offered, no consensus is reached. Instead, viewers are left with competing interpretations of the same events: enforcement or overreach, protest or obstruction, consistency or context. The larger takeaway may not be who won. It may be how quickly modern political debates escalate from narrow policy questions into broader moral indictments. When that happens, clarity often gives way to confrontation. What do you think? Was this a fair exchange of ideas, or a conversation that collapsed under its own tension? Share your perspective in the comments below. If you value structured, analytical breakdowns like this, consider liking the video and subscribing so you don't miss future discussions.